Okay, I have 10:05 right now, so we'll get started. Welcome everybody to our first monthly ODI education seminar. Going forward, this will be on the second Friday of every month at 10 a.m. And if you haven't heard, our next convention will be virtual, so this is a good training for that. All of our speakers will be virtual, and we'll have Zoom webinar set up, so it will be in Zoom meeting. We have a limit of 100 participants for Zoom meeting, and Zoom webinar we can have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Please hold all of your questions until after the presentation. We will have a Q&A session at that time, and I'll walk you through that when we get to the Q&A session. And last but not least, I want to give a special thank you to our sponsor, Oregon Dairy and Nutrition Council, ODNC, and they have a short video they would like you to see. So let me share that screen.
They say dairy farmers were the original sustainability experts, and with Oregon's national award winners in 3 of the past 4 years, that sounds about right. Rick Rial Dairy conserves energy, recycles water, and gives back to local and global communities. Tillamook County Creamery Association makes positive impacts for hunger, education, housing, and more. 3 Mile Canyon Farms eliminates waste through innovative closed-loop agriculture while supporting their community. These best-in-class dairies and processors and many others in Oregon showcase the environmental, economic, and social aspects of sustainability, ensuring that they'll keep working with the land, animals, and great dairy products they love for generations to come. They say dairy farmers were the original sustainability.
Sorry about that. There we are. And joining us today is Jennifer Block and Joe McMahan. Joe and Jennifer work for Dairy Management, Inc. in the National Dairy Checkoff program. They support the work of the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. They collaborate locally in Oregon with the Oregon Dairy and Nutrition Council, ODNC. The Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy is a voluntary organization. They work with leaders and companies from across the dairy value chain to align on pre-competitive priorities, drive progress, and speak with one voice. Their goals are to advance a shared social responsibility platform, demonstrate U.S. Dairy's collective commitment to provide the world responsibly produced dairy foods that nourish people, strengthen communities, and to foster a sustainable future. And with that, take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Are you seeing the full slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having us today. My goal over the next 30 minutes is to share with you some of the marketplace dynamics that make sustainability such an important priority. And with the help of Joe, who hopefully will turn his camera on here soon, we'll show you how the U.S. dairy community is working to position our industry as a solution for people and the planet by taking a leadership position and collaborating across the industry to advance an industry-wide social responsibility platform. The good news is dairy can be a solution. And with the establishment of 2050 environmental stewardship goals and a strong strategy in place with everyone playing their part, dairy is really poised to reset what people think they know about dairy and sustainable nutrition, as well as the environment.
Jennifer, you're showing the presenter view on your slides.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me change that. Thank you, Anne. That was Anne. It was a mysterious voice. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, great. So then everybody knows that I have notes, which is good to make sure that I stay on track. So really, I want to kick off with where consumers are, because at the end of the day, that's who all of our products end up going to. The fact is that for consumers, sustainability is now table stakes. And over the past few years, data from different market research firms concludes that consumers are increasingly prioritizing their purchasing based on a set of core values that include protecting the planet. Really, this slide shows data sets from different companies prior to 2020, so before COVID. And as you can see, consumer expectations include transparency, in addition to investment from brands and companies, environmental programs, and other initiatives. It was really the momentum on sustainability had really started prior to COVID. However, COVID in no way pumped the brakes. It didn't do anything other than to really hit the accelerator. Fast forward to today, and due to COVID, sustainability issues and commitments have really become more important, with over 58% of Americans believing we should respond to climate change with the same urgency that we've responded to COVID. And as people were forced into quarantine, there was a dramatic decrease in carbon emissions seen around the world that no war, pandemic, or recession had really caused before. Studies surfaced that showed people exposed to air pollution were more vulnerable and at risk to getting COVID, especially those in lower income communities. And the link between environmental health and personal health was underscored and realized, basically with consumers saying, 50% of consumers saying the pandemic had made them more aware of the environment. Additionally, and Anne probably knows a little bit more about this than me, but I wanted to point out that 40 million global health professionals called for a green recovery to G20 leaders post-COVID. And moving to my next slide, the youth, so millennials, Gen Z, etc., also agreed. 82% agreed that sustainability was important to them before COVID, and 44% of those felt that it's even now more important that we're in the midst of COVID. Again, showing passion and urgency around climate change is not going to go away. And so, I think what I really wanted to do, with these slides is if anyone had any doubt that sustainability was important or was not important, it certainly is to kind of all sectors, especially our youth, who we're really trying to target. In addition to consumers, and I think this is where it's important, whether your milk or dairy products, stay in Oregon, get distributed nationally through the US, or are exported globally, the global landscape has intensified. And it's not just, here in the US that we're feeling pressure. Countries, the UK, France, Denmark, Sweden, etc., have made countrywide legally binding commitments to reduce their carbon emissions. And so therefore what they do is they go sector by sector and investigate where reductions can be made. And when that happens, you also have then the global dairy industry and particularly a lot of those customers who resell US dairy prioritizing sustainability throughout their supply chain, going all the way back to the farm. As Joe will talk a little bit more, they're required to report on Scope 3 emissions. All of that amongst, several new initiatives that are plant-based. There is, certainly no doubt that there's a movement and there is some limited scientific evidence, about plant-based being better for the environment. So that, in addition to, some of the normal anti-animal campaigns that we're up against, really this is all intensified and has made it more important, than ever for dairy to be looking at sustainability. Ultimately, what we want is for consumers, thought leaders, health professionals, government, not-for-profits, the list goes on, to see that dairy plays an important role in sustainable food systems. And that's why the Innovation Center which was founded by dairy farmers through their checkoff, is compiled of voluntary membership status of farmers, cooperatives, processors, retailers, and trade associations to work together to align on pre-competitive priorities, drive progress, and speak with one voice. Our actions are directed by a board of directors that includes CEOs and chairs, so it is at the leadership level of companies that represent more than 60% of US milk supply, as well as the associations that we're all familiar with that represent both farmers and manufacturers. So, we are such a diverse industry of both large and small farms, large and small companies, but we are really an interdependent value chain. And so we work together through the Innovation Center to really make sure that we are advancing and speaking with the united voice, our social responsibility platform. And this visual here reflects 10 years of relationship and credibility building with the now more than 130 members of the Dairy Sustainability Alliance. The Alliance is open to everyone. So if you are on this call and would like to engage in some of our work, you are welcome to join. There is no cost to join. And Joe and I will tell you a little bit more about some of our upcoming meetings at the end of the presentation. But really, I wanted to demonstrate, hopefully you'll see some of your companies on this slide. And if you don't, you're more than welcome. These companies all want to be part of US dairy sustainability journey and see the value in working collaboratively on this shared platform. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about our meetings, and Joe is going to go into some detail on the work of the of the Dairy Sustainability Alliance when he comes to his slides, but we're really proud of how many are already engaged. Through the Innovation Center, the dairy community really identifies priorities, builds alignment, and develops programs that demonstrate our collective commitment to provide the world responsibly produced dairy foods that nourish people, strengthen communities, and really foster a sustainable future. Our social responsibility plan has 5 focus areas that you can see here on the right. They really have been identified to benefit the entire dairy community, its customers, people that consume nutritious dairy foods, and others. Really collectively, these areas reflect our community's joint efforts to promote social responsibility, encourage continuous improvement, and strengthen trust with consumers and stakeholders. And much of Joe will focus on today is our work in environmental stewardship. Dairy companies and customers want and need to document the environmental impacts of their supply chains from field to table and to earn the trust of consumers. Environmental stewardship, therefore, has been a core component of the Innovation Center's work for more than 12 years. In 2009, we established our first voluntary goal to reduce fluid milk GHG emissions 25% by 2020 on an intensity basis. And last week, we made the public announcement of our 2050 goals, which again, Joe will talk more about. So really just kind of wanted to start this presentation off with why it's so important that we work together as a collective and kind of the ways in which we are joining together and working. And now I'm really going to hand it off to Joe, who's going to talk a lot more in detail about the specific work.
Hi there. Thank you so much. So my role at the Innovation Center is largely around measurement, reporting, aligning our sustainability tracking and communications around globally accepted standards and protocols and credible ways that we can truly demonstrate trust and enhance sales in dairy through our sustainability work. I would like to start with a high-level framing of materiality, which may or may not be on your radars at present, but there has been an increase over the past 10 years, I would say a very, very positive shift from historical supply chain assurance checklists with hundreds of practice-based questions that many in the dairy community receive towards this philosophy of prioritizing through a credible process what's the most important for your organization and your stakeholders. And rather than try to accomplish everything under the sun at the same time, demonstrate how and why you're driving progress against what's most important to you. Our sustainability initiatives within U.S. Dairy comprised of our goals, our work around nutrition, and a lot of other pieces, but in the marketplace, we are positioning ourselves around what's known as the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment. And I'll spend some time talking about that, but that stewardship commitment is framed on materiality. And you can see this chart here, which ranks the importance to our stakeholders, the significance of impacts, and the ability to influence various sustainability priorities that have been deemed pre-competitive, nationally applicable, and relevant for the industry to take action on collectively. And that's certainly not to say that individual companies can't take leadership and differentiate themselves on these topics, nor is it to say that this materiality concept that's been put together by the nation is reflective of your own individual priorities. I will say materiality is a really great exercise should your company want to go down a formalized process to determine how best to move forward on your activities. There are really great guidelines that I'll spend a little more time on talking about our resources later for companies to develop their own assessment, and also a national assessment that you can refer to as a reference. You can go to the next slide, please. So within the, so I'll take a moment to talk about the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment, which is really dairy's social responsibility pledge to our customers, to our consumers, and to any of our engaged stakeholders that, you know, we take seriously topics like environmental stewardship, care for our animals, care for our workers, and it really does provide an overarching umbrella and convening platform through which the industry can come together and define common and consistent measures to track and report progress over time. It also provides a number of really helpful tools and resources that can be used to track and take progress and learn from and improve, you know, through the metrics that have been provided. The FARM Farm Animal Care Program is one of the requirements for adopting the stewardship commitment. I'll back up for a moment and say that the stewardship commitment can be adopted by both dairy processors and dairy cooperatives. And the terms are very similar for both, but of course, you know, if you have a direct connection to a farm, it's a bit different than what you do if you purchase from maybe a cooperative or a farm, but don't directly manage those operations. Some of the terms of adoption for the commitment, you're actively enrolled in the, you're in good standing with the Farmers Assuring Responsible Management Animal Care Program through National Milk, or you're sourcing from 100% FARM enrolled dairies. You're publicly reporting your contributions to the community. And this is fairly broad brush, and we have metrics in our stewardship commitment to do this around, you know, product donations or contributions or volunteer hours. We really want to bring out that dairy is a very socially responsible industry, and I am certain that every one of you on the call has an organization that is doing great work. Our environmental stewardship priorities at the farm level, we have an environmental stewardship calculator through FARM that tracks greenhouse gas emissions, energy intensity, nutrient management, and using this tool for calculating and tracking your environmental footprint through greenhouse gas emissions is one of the terms of adoption. Food safety and traceability, we have robust traceability guidelines for dairy processors. We're now at version 2.0 of these guidelines that were released this year. There's been a lot of time and effort and attention that's been put into these guidelines, and they were updated to reflect FSMA and some of the other recent changes that have taken place in the regulatory environment for traceability as really a gold standard resource. And then engagement, you know, I think this is really core to the stewardship commitment, and that to adopt and be a part of this movement, you have to be at the table, you have to actively contribute towards continuing to improve and refine our work, really driving towards our shared vision of making society better through dairy. And really core to this from the environmental side are our environmental stewardship vision and goals. Now, one last thing before we go to the next slide. Anybody that's interested in learning more, I encourage you to start at www.usdairy.com/commitment. We have over 25 companies actively enrolled now. What is it, Jim? Maybe 28? The number grows pretty rapidly, and we're over 70% of the milk supply. And this is a tremendous win for the industry. I mean, I am biased because I work in dairy, but I don't feel any other commodity group in the US or the world really has collectively come to this point. And so it's really something we can take pride in, and I encourage you to learn more about it. If you go to the next slide. Now, it's critical as an industry that we're not only looking at what's taking place here. I think it's very clear that we live in the world is global at this point, right? Our touch points are international. We have tremendous influencers shifting the dialogue and the perceptions of dairy, for instance, coming from Europe, Nestle, Unilever, Danone, these major players that have global expectations for dairy. And so we, within the US have to make sure that our metrics, and you can see the metrics at a glance screenshot here, are aligned with globally recognized standards and protocols first off. And you can see, that the small little logos at the bottom of this slide around various pieces where we've really worked hard to position ourselves against ISO standards or the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the most widely used accounting and reporting methodology for greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Multi-stakeholder national forums such as the Sustainable Agriculture platform that brings a lot of these global marketplace customers to the table, and science-based targets, which is another tremendously important and influential GHG reduction call to action for the private sector. We have more documentation that can go into detail on this. I won't do that in this call. I'm happy to share more information though. The important thing about this slide is that we really work on laddering up the work of our stewardship commitment into the global marketplace. And in that turn, really showing the progress that we're making at a national level, towards these sustainable development goals, towards the global influencers, policymakers, and others in the UN, for instance, that can really have that trickle-down effect to changing the way that dairy is accepted in the US market. So you'll see this logo, the DSF, the Dairy Sustainability Framework. That's a really interesting piece of work. All around the world, there's been this universal consensus on what at the highest level are deemed sustainability priorities for dairy. And, I think most of these are very familiar to you. Greenhouse gas should come as no surprise. Working conditions, animal care. I will say one piece that's missing is nutrition and health. And that's something that is a dialogue that is continuing on how we position that through a framework such as the DSF. We are an aggregating member of the DSF in the US market, which means that we provide the convening forum through the Dairy Sustainability Alliance. We provide the metrics and measures that we can use to contribute towards global reporting. And we also provide this national reporting on behalf of the industry to the DSF. Our US impacts are combined with those from Australia and Europe and other places around the world for global progress reports on dairy's positive impact and improvements over time that really help in that global space. And again, I say local to global sustainability leadership because I think it's fantastic that we're contributing our progress into this global framework that's really anonymized and aggregated across the entire globe. But again, all dairy is created equal. I feel like US dairy can sometimes be more equal than others, to quote Animal Farm. And I really like that we have an ability, through our structured measure, metric, and convening process to really differentiate and put a stake in the ground that we're doing the right thing, and that when you are looking at what sustainability means, we're here to just help distill, science versus perception, maybe implications or assumptions that dairy isn't being an dairy is not an environmentally sustainable commodity. Jen talked about anti-animal agriculture and plant-based movements. It's really never been more important to show what we're doing in a transparent, collaborative manner that is recognized and supported by the people who are really influencing where we can go as an industry in the future. You can go to the next slide, please. Which I think is a great segue into our environmental stewardship goals. These goals, and you can see what they are here, and I'll go ahead and talk about what they are. we're committed to, by 2050, we have committed to become carbon neutral or better. This is huge. We are committed to optimizing water use while maximizing recycling and improving water quality by optimizing utilization of manure and nutrients. I would say that right now, there is just an urgent opportunity to declare these new environmental visions and goals for dairy. It's an imperative that we maintain our leadership position and secure dairy's place in sustainable food systems. You know, in a marketplace in which setting goals and documenting collective progress is now foundational. These goals are pretty hot off the press. They were released in April of this year. There was a much bigger push, more recently, I would say in the last month, and I forget the exact date, around our net zero and our on-farm greenhouse gas emissions efforts. COVID, of course, really dominated the headlines, and we didn't feel it appropriate to go loud and proud on these goals at the time. But we're at the point now where we're getting news articles in the New York Times or the Washington Post. We're working on how we can amplify through different channels and really tell this story in a way that goes back to the people who need to hear it. I would say, just for some history on these goals, for over a year, the goals were developed. And within the Innovation Center, we have a broad network of farmers, cooperatives, and processors throughout the industry, really working together through the Innovation Center to arrive at an environmental vision for U.S. dairy. We took a lot of input from experts and our broad base of stakeholders who support and watch what dairy is doing. And it's really important here because a lot of people go to the farm when they see these goals. But beyond the field and farm level, I want to note that the goals are collective of the industry and include U.S. dairy processing. This is so important because we don't want to maintain this. We don't want farmers to feel that all of this burden goes down to them. And everything we need to do as an industry to improve is because farms have to be better. It's very important that processors show their support, involvement, and contribution to these goals as a collective industry that all feels that sustainability is the way that we want to act and the way that we want to move and the way that we want to demonstrate who we are, to the people that buy dairy products every day. These goals are collective and they're set by the year 2050. That's a long way off, but we also have a commitment for, quantifiable and credible measures of progress reporting every 5 years. We have pathways in place to which we're starting to get the information that we need to collect this information. We don't have it all figured out yet. There's a lot of work taking place now that we put ourselves out there on what is the best way to measure that we are optimizing water use. What is the best way to measure that we're making improvements in water quality? And of course, how best do we demonstrate that our greenhouse gas emissions are going down over time? This work is significant and difficult, but it is achievable. And while not all farms or processors can do everything, and may not all of them, won't achieve carbon neutrality, there's at least something that everybody can do to support and reach these goals. And we have the desire and drive to get there. So before going into the processor side, I'll take a moment and describe our farm and field strategy. I think you'll find this interesting. It's termed the Net Zero Initiative. This is led by Dairy Management, Inc., our national checkoff and the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, in collaboration with National Milk Producers Federation, the U.S. Dairy Export Council, and Nutrient, which is a company formed by the dairy industry to reduce the environmental footprint of dairy and make it economically viable to do so. The intention of Net Zero is to remove barriers that stand in the way of dairy farms being recognized and most importantly, appropriately compensated for the environmental assets they manage and enhance on their farms. There's 3 core areas of focus. I'm addressing the barriers to achieving net zero. The groundwork provides the foundational environmental and economic science, and there's a lot of work going on right now. We're in the process of hopefully obtaining a research grant to continue this work and really doing the modeling and the scenarios that are needed, on paper to show that this is feasible. The dairy scale for good is the next step. That's very exciting. It provides focused work on a small number of farms to establish proof of concept. Cost is no object. What can you do to be carbon neutral? How can the technologies that work be scaled? How can the costs go down? How can there be an economic return on these various pieces? And work is taking place right now to identify and establish demonstration farms throughout the country, a small number, that we can actually go out and test various technologies. We can see what has panned out in our models and apply it to the real world to ensure that this is accurate and that we can actually do this through working farms today. And then the collective impact piece, which is the final one, is focused on scaling these findings. A lot of great work there. If you look up US Dairy Net Zero Initiative, you'll see a lot of positive press. We received up to $10 million in support from Nestle on reaching this objective, and we envision that we'll have additional partners and sponsors coming down the line. So now let's focus on what directly is in your camp, which is the processor side. Within the Innovation Center and under the Dairy Sustainability Alliance, we have a processor working group of more than 50 participants that represents over 30 processor organizations. And they've been at the table now for roughly five to 7 years, engaging in conversations. And if you can go to the next slide, please. They've been engaging in conversations and discussions on how to advance sustainability in the dairy processing space for years. I mentioned, the breadth of participants we currently have. They generally meet twice in person, although this year, big asterisks, no in-person meetings, but virtual, to really discuss, how can we advance measurements? What are consistent measures? What does reporting look like for dairy processors? What resources and tools do we need? And what types of initiatives can we take together to really move that forward? And we have a lot of really great accomplishments that have come out of that. The processor metrics and the stewardship commitment are largely driven by the Dairy Processor Working Group. The guidance and the supplementary materials, we have a lot of them that are focused on processors, and I've got a slide where I'll bring those up. As well as stewardship commitment adoption. I think a large number of our adopting processors came through this processor working group, and they definitely had a very strong voice on what terms of adoption look like for our stewardship commitment. So I'll go into the current activities of the processor working group. The processor working group, upon the establishment of the 2050 environmental goals, really saw the need to not try to tackle everything as an entire group, but go into focus groups where they could dive into specific topics and then come back and share that knowledge for feedback and input and direction on what we can do, collaboratively as dairy processors. So there's four working teams that came out of the goals and really were seen as priorities for dairy processing. Greenhouse gas emissions, packaging, waste, and water. These teams are probably about two or 3 months in development now, so they're still getting started on defining, their charters, their objectives, but a lot of progress has been made. And on the greenhouse gas emissions side, one of the more technical pieces is that within our 2050 environmental goals, the scope includes packaging, which of course touches dairy processing directly. What does that look like? How can emission factors be identified for common dairy packaging products? How can they be calculated? But more importantly, also, what can they do to support farmers? Because so much of this NZI initiative is, the NZI initiative in particular, which has gotten a lot of press, is really focused on the farm. But the way this works is through mutually beneficial collaboration and support across the supply chain. So the Net Zero Initiative team is exploring opportunities between dairy processors on the farm on how they can mutually support efforts to reduce the carbon footprint on farms. The benefit to dairy processors is that if they're doing supply chain reporting to a customer, or if they're just doing their own CSR reporting and they're branding themselves around their sustainability practices, it provides a great opportunity to show how they're supporting farmers and really driving positive impact. So that's something that is in the works, and there's actually a dairy processor working group meeting coming up where these findings will be shared and this discussion will take place. Packaging, I started to go into it on the GHG emissions, but there's far more to it than that. I'd imagine some of you at least have seen increasing pressure on the need to transition to recyclable packaging, renewable packaging products. And that's a challenge. There's things like cheese wraps where maybe they even can be recycled, but where's the infrastructure to do it? And so, developing a survey to understand the packaging materials was something that took place to get kind of this baseline of where our priority areas. But really, at the end of the day, we looked at these results we saw the systemic challenges that are taking place in packaging. And we realized that, we as the dairy group have a lot of collective influence. We're representing billions and billions of dollars of industry, but we are by no means alone in trying to figure out these challenges. So we have some work taking place now on, well, who can we leverage? Where can we go to really share our contributions to moving the needle and making some change in this so that we do have better access to infrastructure. We do have better access to sustainable packaging materials that are cost efficient. So this is the first time within our Dairy Sustainability Alliance that packaging has been put to the forefront. And we have in our upcoming meeting, which we will pitch shortly, a focus on packaging. There is a pre-webinar meeting, I believe November 2nd, which I can work with Ann to get out to you, where there's going to be discussions from Nestle on their work towards 2025 fully recyclable packaging, as well as consumer insights discussions and innovations and trends as well. I think it'll be a good use of time. And in our Dairy Sustainability Alliance meeting, the dairy processors who have been involved in this work will speak firsthand to what's taking place, and then have an open and collaborative conversation with Alliance members where we truly hope to hear from you in terms of, what can we do? How can we convene? Or I guess, how can we really catalyze the need for this? Waste, again, we're looking at greenhouse gas measurement and accounting here as a starting point. Most processors have zero waste plans in place or are tracking their reduction efforts to become more efficient. I mean, beyond the fact that you're reducing waste, you're saving costs, right? We have a hierarchy that shows how you can divert your waste to the highest possible needs. So it's better to feed animals with your waste than to incinerate it in the landfill, right? And we actually call that resource recovery instead of waste because it sounds a lot better. A lot of these byproducts aren't waste at all. But we do need to account for greenhouse gas emissions on that. And so if you're diverting your waste to a higher cause, if it's not going to a landfill, how does that count towards our carbon neutral goal? How can you really work towards that as a processor? And so there's a tool from the EPA called the Waste Reduction Model, or WARM, that we are beginning conversations with EPA to better understand and potentially use. Water is a real challenge in processing. Water quality conversations really boil down to regulatory requirements, which are often robust. I have no doubt in Oregon you have plenty of those. So what is it we can tell around recycling? How can we better repurpose, recycle, and reuse our water, and how best can that be measured? And that's a current activity of this working group. We go to the next slide, please. I'll talk briefly as well. The dairy processors that have adopted the stewardship commitment have come together to develop, what they have called the processor stewardship reporting tool. And it actually is based on Intellex, which is a widely used environmental health and safety platform, to provide something beyond just a spreadsheet of how can we measure and report, how can we track, how can we input consistent and credible data that can be used. The initiative is funded and overseen by dairy processors. The reporting is anonymized and aggregated through a very secure manner so that we can talk about collective progress of dairy processing. But dairy processors have also found a lot of value in using this within their own supply chain reporting on sustainability. Go to the next slide. I'll take just a moment to talk about resources. And I think there's some really good starting points for everybody on this call to get a better feel for where we are. And I think there's some stuff that'll be very helpful for you. I'll start at the right. The Dairy Processor Handbook is really our Bible for dairy processors in terms of ways to credibly, consistently measure and track progress in processor facilities using the metrics that are within our U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment. I think you'll find it tremendously helpful. There's also guidance, and it goes deep into if you want to measure greenhouse gas in your facilities, or if you want to measure, water or community or workforce. These are measures to do it, and this is the process you can take. Speaking of greenhouse gas, we actually have in-depth greenhouse gas inventory guidance, not only on how to report your scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are those in your direct operations, but also scope 3, or that which is taking place on the farm. And I encourage you to look those over as well. I think you'll find it very helpful. And this was formally blessed by the organization, the World Resources Institute, that designed the greenhouse gas protocol, and that's a first for the agricultural sector. There's sector guidance in things like transportation or oil and gas. U.S. dairy is the first agriculture sector to obtain this blessing in this document. The stewardship commitment, which is second from the left, is really the most instrumental resource, I think, to understand what we do. It provides a lot of great high-level overview and context on the stewardship commitment, what it is, how to get involved. It's also going through a revision and updating process that should be available by mid-November. So feel free to look at it now, but also just a plug that there'll be a newer document that shows some minor updates and changes in the next couple of weeks. I say in the next month. And then finally, I mentioned that materiality guide for U.S. dairy. Grounding yourself on the concept of materiality, what it means and how that process can be applied in an organization that wants to build out their sustainability efforts is well worth your time. You can go to the next slide.
This one.
Jen, do you want to speak to this and maybe wrap up?
Yeah, I will actually. I want to just point out again, thanks so much, Joe. You gave us a lot of great technical and as I said at the beginning today, Joe and I are really focusing on environmental, but you made a really good point when we were talking about how we ladder up to both the DSF and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I do want to reassure everyone on this call that there is a piece of work that the Innovation Center engages in on food security, and we have a task force that is looking at that. And it really looks at, ensuring that it looks at the nutrition value of dairy and ensuring that we get it into the hunger system. So for those of you who, have that question, I wanted to make sure you knew that the Innovation Center does look at nutrition, sustainable nutrition particularly, and food security, just that Joe and I are presenting on that today. But that's something that we can work to find the right people that can work with Ann and the folks at the Oregon Dairy Nutrition Council, should that be desired. As Joe mentioned a couple times, last week was really our public announcement, because it's all well and good that Joe is helping the dairy community, guide them through us having these fantastic ways of measuring and reporting, so we have proof points. But it's nothing if we don't get out there and actually tell that story and really help launch U.S. dairy, more into that agenda setting media, so that thought leaders take notice, and that we're part of that national and global conversation on sustainable nutrition. And so this is just a sampling, as Joe mentioned, in addition to publicly announcing the goal, we announced our first partner with the Net Zero Initiative, which is Nestle, and a $10 million investment. Hopefully there'll be many more that come behind that. We also took out full page ads in the Washington Post and New York Magazine. We had our website, US Dairy, updated. It was running with our social and connected TV programming. Really, it was what we would call a 360-degree campaign to really get the message out that US Dairy is proactively working to be an environmental solution. And with that, I'm actually going to, hopefully, I did turn the sound down. We're going to just share a video that really helps demonstrate that in just under 2 minutes. Hopefully you could hear that, but the music that went with it, so it was more entertaining. It was actually under a minute. We have a couple different versions of that video because we used one to profile our phenomenal winners of the U.S. Dairy Sustainability Awards, as you saw earlier from ODNC. really just want to end with what we've been plugging all the way around, which is that the Dairy Sustainability Alliance meets regularly throughout the year via webinar, but traditionally we have 2 meetings a year. When possible, we have those in person. This year, both meetings are virtual. So that's really great because there's no need to travel, which that's where a cost usually comes in, is from travel and registration. Because they're virtual, there is none. And we welcome all. This is a great opportunity to register for the virtual meeting and be part and see what we get achieved at these meetings. So the first one that's on the left is the actual fall meeting of the Dairy Sustainability Alliance. And then every autumn, we also bring together the rest of agriculture to learn from one another, to share the progress that we're making at the Sustainable Agricultural Summit. So those take part 1 week apart. And we'll make sure that Ann and Matt have all of the information that they can, if you don't already have the registration information, that you can send it out to everyone. But it's just a great year, isn't it, to be able to engage, no travel involved, and learn more about the work of the Innovation Center.
So is that everything, Jennifer?
It is, yeah. With that, I know that we're Joe and I are open to take questions and criticism for our performance.
Okay. I'm going to pull your screen share so I can see everybody, or everybody can see me. And this is the first time we've done this, so I'll explain the QA session. Down at the bottom of your screen, click on participants, and you will see the participants window, all of us on the right, or in the floating window if you're on a Mac. And at the very bottom, there is a raise hand icon. You can press that and we'll see that you want to ask a question. And we want to test that out so everyone can use it. So everyone hit that blue hand button so we can make sure everyone can use it. See lots of hands going up. Okay, and we're gonna liven things up a little bit with a door prize to start out with. We had Cindy Schumacher in the meeting before. Is she still here? Let's clear everybody. Let's have Cindy raise her hand. Cindy Schumacher, she's still here. There she is. I see her. Can she raise her hand? Maybe. Okay, we'll contact her by email. I see her still on the list. She just won a $20 Amazon gift card, so we'll email that to her. And can I get a hand raised for our first question? There's Cindy. I see her now. I lowered your hand. And can I get a first question for somebody? Somebody can raise their hand. Don't make me ask the first question. Okay, we have Patrick Ryan. We unmuted Patrick, and go ahead.
Hi, thank you. That was wonderful. This was my first time participating. I work with Smith Brothers Farms and Alpenrose Dairy. They're out of Kent, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, and interested in participating more. And I was wondering where. I don't know where to start. Would be my question.
That's a great question, Patrick. I'll let Jen do it, but I think
it's
a very good place to start.
So if I was going to start, I would definitely start, come to the virtual Fall Dairy Sustainability Alliance meeting, and that will really get you up to speed. That's a great place. I think the second thing is, if you have Matt give us your contact details, we do quarterly newsletters, and that's another great place where you can read about the work of the Innovation Center and decide where maybe it's best for your business. Not every business is going to be involved in everything, right? Your piece, what's most interesting to you, those two. And then, what I would say, Patrick, Joe talked about the materiality assessment. That's another great place to start, especially the guide. because what it really helps businesses do, no matter where you are in the supply chain, no matter how big or small, it really just helps give focus to what is materially important. It helps you focus in on what's materially important to your business. And then, once you really look through that, there's the companion guide that Joe developed on U.S. dairy's materiality. And so you can look at that and say, oh, that's interesting. I really didn't give thought to worker welfare. I see why that might be important. Maybe we should go back to the table and discuss, with my business partners or my leadership team, how that fits in. So it's a really good guide to help start the conversation within your business.
Anne, did you want to say something?
Oh, well, I was just going to say hi to Patrick and let you know that I'm your local contact at ODNC here in Portland. And so I'll get you looped in on the work that we do with processors, and happy to help you.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone, for answering that question. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick. And I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Is there a way that they can send more questions to you, to Jennifer and Joe? Or should they work through Anne?
Absolutely. I think we have time for one more.
Okay, we have time for one more. I'm looking for a hand. There's a hand from Anne. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Dan.
Okay, so not a question, but in the absence of other questions, I just want to underscore something that Joe said and Jennifer has said as well throughout this presentation. Through all the words and depth of this presentation, I hope everybody sees that this is the real deal and understands. I've heard it said, I've had health professionals say to me, it's really amazing within the whole scope of agriculture that dairy has really gone deep on this. And it's not magic fairy dust. And really from Junction City to Brussels, this work is very serious and intentional to keep us all in business and to be profitable in the future. So I want to thank Joe and Jennifer for exposing our industry out here to the work. And, I'm really happy to be a conduit and so we can assist you in your business.
And we are in our last 3 minutes. So I wanted to thank Jennifer and Joe for both being here. If you have additional questions, please send them to Anne or me or Retha, and we will make sure it gets through to Jennifer and Joe. And finally, Joe, you mentioned those resources. Are those free downloads on the site?
Yeah, I'll take a personal check, but if you prefer not to do that, you can get them for free. They're at usdairy.com/commitment.
Okay, I got that. So make all checks out to cash and send them to Joe McMahan.
Yes.
And thank you all for coming. And I hope to see you all next month on the second Friday. We will send out an invitation when we get closer. And thank you all very much for attending. And I will send out the Zoom recording of this when it is available sometime next week. It'll be available today, but sometime next week, I'll get that together. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.